Welcome to the AIOps Evolution Weekly broadcast. This series features discourse on topics pertinent to the C-level conversation revolving the integration of artificial intelligence into the ever-evolving IT operations landscape. Discover trends and actionable tips for digital transformation, as well as the latest news on how AIOps is transforming business and government operations to create flow in their organization. And don't stay in the dark on the latest industry news. Join the AIOps Evolution community to stay connected and subscribe to the show at AIOpsevolution.com. Now, let's join our hosts, Sean McDermott and Bill Driscoll, IT thought leaders, visionaries, and the voices on the other end of the mic for the latest episode of AIOps Evolution Weekly.
Welcome, everyone, to the AIOps Weekly broadcast. I'm your host, Sean McDermott, and my co-host, Bill. Bill, how you doing this week?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Good. Did you have a good week?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Pretty good. Lots going on, which is nothing new. So, a lot new is nothing new.
Yeah, same old. We're getting into the beginning of the fall. It's same old already. So everything gets normal so fast. So before we get started, I just wanted to say if you like this broadcast, I think what are we on, like 9 episodes now?
This is 9. I think this is 9.
This is 9. We're having so much fun, I lose track. If you like if you like these episodes, go ahead and hit the subscribe button below, and you can also click on the little bell so you get notified of new episodes coming out. If you happen to be in one of the learning labs out there, you should see a form that pops up where you can subscribe there too. So love to have you subscribe and get notified of new episodes that we broadcast every Friday night or Friday afternoon. So so this episode, Bill, we are going to continue on with DevOps. So last week we started talking about the observability of DevOps, the ops side of DevOps. And this episode, we want to talk a little bit more about the dev side of DevOps and test, automated builds, test, and release. So I know you have a lot of thoughts on this, so why don't we just dive right in?
Yeah, a lot is maybe relative, but I have some thoughts. I think that, last week we talked about observability. We talked about how observability feeds monitoring. So I think I said, DevOps really started with a problem, right? And the problem was, how do we release software? How do we release even infrastructure reliably? And how does it not break as soon as we release it because we didn't do enough testing? And so how do we solve the operational ownership problem and kind of preventing a lot of these issues? And that was one of the problem statements. And we talked a lot about that and how observability data needs to be created kind of and owned by DevOps so that it can be driven into the operation. The second part of that problem, which really came about as companies advanced and the business sort of drove really digital transformation and faster releases, is to go faster. So it's, how does DevOps help us go faster? And I think, if you look at how to go faster, you look at bottlenecks. Where do we need to eliminate some bottlenecks, or where's the long pole in the tent? Operation, obviously, one of those poles could be you release it and it breaks and you got to bring it back into the garage, right? You got to bring it back into the development shop. And that's the worst kind of all, because now you've exposed it to customers. And so I think there's a lot of effort went into QA and testing. And I think that's where the long pole ended up being, was developers were releasing, and then it just went through testing cycles, through QA cycles. And that's really where that long pole and really became. And so then it becomes, well, how do we start automating these tests? And then it became, why should we have to manually run these tests? And then we should build and test all in the same framework. And so like open source tools or like Jenkins and others are out there to do that and to build those tests. And so where I think that's sort of where AIOps comes into the picture, right? Is you need to be able to introduce machine learning. You got to be able to introduce learning from the data, learning from the results of the test, learning from the behavior of the application to drive what are the tests that need to be done, instead of it being very much a manual creation of tests that coders might create or that the DevOps team might create. But machine learning should be able to start generating and driving some of those tests and using the results for feedback loops to make sure that, maybe they're not testing everything every release, but what needs to be tested most. And I think some of the authors we brought a couple articles in talks about, that data that's used in machine learning isn't just data that you get in your test and your QA and your development, your test, your QA, your staging environments. It's also the data that comes in from operational environments or your production environments as well. And so that's really the big kind of takeaway is, how do we go faster? And then how does machine learning, how does the AIOps play in helping that go faster? So I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that, Sean, on, where that fit is?
You know me, I always have thoughts on something. They may not be good, but I always have thoughts on something. I think we're, obviously what's going on right now in, AI ops as related to DevOps is heavily focused on the observability side, like we talked about last week. The opportunity, I think, on the build and release, test and release side is just as you said, right? How do we? Are there ways for us to take data? So from an I guess there's two types of observability data too. One is, real performance data, right? Are we having outages? Are we having issues, degradation of service, and how do we bring those back into the build, the part of the build, the chain where you're building and enhancing and continuing improving. But there's also, I think, the ability to bring in information related around usage of these applications. How are they being used? When are they being used? When are you looking at different loads and time of use and geography of use and things like that? And that starts becoming even more interesting when you get into like DevSecOps, right? Where you start looking at geographical type information for improvement of security and things like that. So right now, I really see, when I think about DevOps or DevSecOps using AI, to me it's more kind of potential, right, of where it could go. Of my companies, we develop software and several. And we have a SaaS platform in one of the companies, and we do a lot of automated testing. And for pretty much every module code we write a whole bunch of tests, right? And those tests go into the DevOps chain, and they're used for testing the software and overnight automated testing. But it is a very manually intensive process. So I think as people start thinking about using AI to, as you said, start auto-generating testing, I think that could be very, very interesting to really expand, because if you don't write a test, then you're just not going to test anything. And that's part of the problem. I mean, there's kind of two parts of there's always two things around developers that you're always a challenge, documenting code and testing code. And so using AI to do both actually would be great, the ability to kind of use AI as you're writing code to create, natural language processing, to create documentation of the code and on auto comment code and things like that as you're writing it would be very, there's a lot of potential there. And then the idea of being able to use AI to continually improve your testing automatically and do some predictive analysis of testing, and where you might be able to branch off to do a deeper level test automatically would be, of huge value. So, I think right now, the DevOps tool chain is really, really more heavily weighted towards, the observability side of this.
I know one of the, in talking as far as releases go, I know Chaos Monkey is something that's out there. Not an expert on it, don't know a whole lot, but I think that's sort of the predecessor maybe to the machine learning or AIOps and the testing, and that we're going to introduce chaos and look for anything and everything that could go wrong. And we're going to test that as we release software and apply, those kind of use cases or scale cases. I think machine learning is probably being introduced into that, being introduced as a next step, or maybe even part of that, to be more intelligent, I guess, about how you're doing that chaos testing that's being informed by you've learned behavior of the application. So I think that all Go ahead, Sean.
I know. I think when it comes to AI, right, we need to kind of think about this in two different ways, right? And especially in AI ops, we need to think about it in the context of processing lots and lots of data, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we need to also look at it in the context of predictability of certain things happening in the future. So, so a lot of that is done through processing lots and lots of data and looking at behavioral type things. But I don't know if you've seen this. There's a documentary on the AI platform that IBM wrote for, or I'm sorry, it wasn't IBM. I think it was Google wrote for Go, the game of Go.
Okay.
And it's fascinating if you get a chance to look at it. And essentially, they picked Go because Go is actually the most complex game in the world, more complex than chess. And very interesting things as they went through this kind of journey of coding and letting the machine learn Go and learn things. It started, it took on these grandmasters, and eventually it took on, like, I think what the number one guy in the world in Go. I had actually never even heard of Go before this. And the really interesting thing, and you can actually see the game while they film the game. The AI platform essentially made a move that was completely unprecedented. Like, and I don't know anything about Go, but literally the whole room just like was aghast. Like everyone was like, "What the?" And even the player that is playing was like, "That was such an unconventional move." He was confused. He was like, "What's going on? Did it just make a massive mistake?" Right? Mm-hmm. And it seemed in the world of all the humans, like the machine just made a mistake. And even the programmers are like, "We don't really understand why the machine did that." And it turned out that 40, 50, however moves down the road, the machine won based on that really unconventional thing. So the human couldn't even comprehend it. We can only think so far ahead. Yeah. So I think that's where AI is going to get really interesting in the front end of the DevOps chain, is to start using data from observability and things like that to start looking at patterns and looking at things to test that we haven't even thought of, because there are too many steps down the code chain. And that's pretty exciting stuff, but it also,
and I think that
you could also start thinking about, Terminator, right? At that point, where it starts to self-thinking, right? Because it's actually now, it could get to the point where it starts writing code, right? Where it's actually why, I mean, there definitely are things going on right now where AI is actually writing code, but being able to consistently write code of complex applications is a really interesting thing to be looking at, right?
Yeah. So the AI ops people don't like, or the machines that have to operate AI's code is probably not happy. They're. I'm just kidding. Just saying, instead of, you got AI writing machine, now you got AI operating it, and I'm sure they're having the same fights that the humans were going to have.
Yeah, well, you're seeing it being AI being applied to a lot of things. So there's a site out there called Jarvis.ai, right? And basically they're using AI to write marketing copy, and it's actually very interesting. They have, I don't know where they're getting their source data, but they must be just scanning the internet for all kinds of data. But there's different templates that you can pick, and when you pick a template, it will actually write the content for you. And I've used it, and I used it a couple of days ago, and I put in a couple prompts in there, 3 or 4 sentences of prompts, and it kicked out, almost 300 words of copy. And I have to say, it was pretty good, right? Yeah. So the ability for us to basically say, hey, look, we want to start optimizing our code, and especially the codes that are creating very, right now they're learning and they're creating algorithms and modifying algorithms. I mean, what's to stop at some point, AI from actually creating code from scratch, right? Yeah. And building the automated testing routines from scratch and releasing that code automatically. I mean, I think we're a ways away from that, but it's completely conceivable to me.
Yep, exactly. So that, I guess, as far as segue to the first article we kind of brought up, I think we had 2 articles today to drill into this concept, or at least bring in some other perspectives. The first one was written by Andreas Grabner, who's a DevOps person at Dynatrace. I think he's more of an activist DevOps at Dynatrace. And I know Dynatrace is working with an open source project called Keptn, Keptn, and using that as somewhat of some proof of concepts, part of their product, integrating with it, and really showing value as to how their monitoring and observability data and their AIOps capabilities can be brought into the release framework that the Keptn allows. And so he wrote about in this article that AIOps done right, delivery automation for DevOps and SREs, two different ways DevOps can be or AIOps can be applied. And it really is that taking data that's in your production environment where AIOps is traditionally monitoring production and using that data to pull that back into your DevOps. And so one is you can and then it's the other way as well, so that you can push data from your testing and your QA data up into your AIOps solution so that it can be leveraged and used in production. And so I think of that as, several software companies I kind of been involved with. Scale, you talked about security, but scale is another big issue. So you have load tests being run in the lab, that's certain transactions per minute or second or whatever, and it worked great in the lab. Now you get into the real world, it's interacting with so many different things, so many different customers, spikes and integrations and API calls, and it breaks. And what do you need to know in operations? Well, what did we test it for back in the lab, right? Or back in test. And you want to be able to go back and look at that. And what he's proposing really is that AIOps data, or that data from your test from all those different environments, mapped to the same entity, the same microservice, or the same part of your infrastructure. You should be able to go back and see that automatically and say, oh, look at 500 transactions and supported, and now we're spiking to 10,000. And that's why it broke. And we got to go fix that. And so I think breaking down those barriers between DevOps and testing, and then how it works in operation, the same data should be available regardless of what the environment is. And it should be mapped to the same entities that are being kind of promoted through those environments. And I thought that was pretty fascinating to kind of, he articulated a lot of some of the thoughts that we had as far as how the data can be used in both ways.
Yeah, very interesting. I think one of the things you brought up there is scale, right? And back some years ago, I did a lot of work with Yahoo, and they had 400,000 servers at the time, scattered around the country or world. I mean, to operate at scale at that, and you're seeing now. I started seeing some statistics the other day. I kind of came across something about big data statistics, because we keep talking about this what AIOps is about, processing mass amounts of data, and but we've never really kind of quantified it. We just say it's becoming, and I read this all the time in articles, and it's kind of the primary drivers that humans can't process the amount of data anymore, and that's true, but no one ever really kind of puts it in context of what that means. Mm-hmm. So this big data statistics is, Google gets 3.5 billion searches a day. Facebook alone, right? Facebook alone has something like 2.8 billion active users per month. So you think about the amount of posts that are going up there, the photos that are going up there, and what they're doing in processing of photos and tagging and cross-linking and the algorithms for connecting people. It's this is what we're talking about. Another interesting statistic: every person in the world generates 1.7 megabits of data per second. I don't know exactly what that is as far as that amount. It's kind of like every person drinks or eats this amount of sugar per day. But you think about it, 1.7 megabits per second per day is pretty crazy.
That means we're being watched, right?
Yeah, and another big statistic that I was and this is a source from CIO, is 80 to 90% of all the data is unstructured, right? And 95% of companies, IT leaders, are saying that unstructured data is one of the biggest problems that they have. So what you're seeing is massive amounts of data being collected, and most of it's unstructured. So the AI ops really starts with a data problem, and it was interesting about that from that article of the scalability aspect of it. So, which kind of leads on to the article that I kind of pulled up this week, and this is AI ops is an essential DevOps toolchain component by Helen Beal, who I believe is with Micromuse. Not Micromuse,
MoogSoft. She's an advisor to MoogSoft. So a lot of she's written a few articles which are very interesting. She obviously has some great experience, but she's advising them. So a lot of them have a bent towards MoogSoft's point of view.
Yeah, certainly. So we take some of these things we take with a grain of salt, right? Because they're really marketing. But this one was kind of interesting because she was again talking about the data problem, right, and the big data problem of AI ops and how that feeds into DevOps, and the statistic here that I thought was kind of interesting, I haven't validated, is 90% of the world's data has been generated in the last 2 years, and 80% of the business is unstructured. So we just talked about that. So one thing that I really kind of point that I liked about this article that she made was she comes from a DevOps background, and she made the statement, I have long incorporated planning, service desk, and monitoring into my DevOps toolchain architectures. Too often teams focus only on CI/CD elements without considering the end-to-end value cycle. And I think that's a really good point to always kind of keep in mind. And we've talked about this in previous episodes, that AI is just proliferating through all different functions of the operational environment, not just event handling. And it's not just kind of the DevOps tool chain. It's how all these pieces start working together, whether it's a service desk application that's generating data, and you can using AI to bring context of that to the performance observability data in the DevOps tool chain, to then feed back into the build and the testing and the release side of things. So, I think there's a lot to go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, I read the article as well. And, there was two things I kind of took from it. One, I'll quote, I think you just quoted her. I thought she wrote something pretty well. So I'll just read what she wrote, which was, AI ops provides essential feedback on the customer experience that must be applied to the next iteration of improvements for the organization. It's not just a way to fix problems faster. It's the basis, and when she says it's the AI ops is the basis for data-driven conversations, decisions, and empirical experimentation. So I think very much the same thing that the Dynatrace folks were saying. It's the same thing she's saying, is that you're not getting the customer experience when you're running your tests and doing your releases and the staging and all these other pre-production environments. It's really, you're thinking in the production, you're getting the actual customer's impact on your IT, impact on your applications, and you're getting their experience. If you're measuring, even if synthetic transactions or actual response times you're getting on the web or the internal APIs, that's critical to bring back into the DevOps toolchain and inform that toolchain so that they can write better tests, they can produce better tests. So that was one thing, and it's very much in line with what we said. The thing she said that we haven't really talked about is just the importance of collaboration, and that ChatOps is what we're seeing more, and other ops that we're seeing more around just better collaboration, instead of it just being in a ticket where you submit the update to the ticket, or you're emailing, or you're on conference bridges, but chat rooms like Teams or Google Meets or Slack is presenting, or just some of the ticketing software provides ChatOps now. It's really a better way to collaborate, but you're not just putting humans entering that information, but the information that's coming out of your AI ops is all being made available in this sort of chat room environment. That's not just one-dimensional, just information being posted, but just a two-dimensional set of information that you kind of have in your chat room. And that she's emphasizing how important that is, especially in the DevOps kind of release cycle, but then also in production and then cycling all the way back. So I don't know if you had any thoughts or experience or around ChatOps, or does how that might fit in an environment like this.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, just kind of diverging off of it, DevOps for a second, to talk about ChatOps. what I've seen with ChatOps is that there's been a number of AIOps platforms that have embedded ChatOps into their platform and made it part of their isolation and collaboration capabilities, right? And what we have found with our clients is that a lot of the clients don't want to use that. They want to use their existing chat platforms like Slack mostly, or Teams or something like that, and they want to integrate into there. So I think I think it was good that some of these vendors early on came out with these ChatOps capabilities, but they're going to be forced into taking their platforms and integrating them into like Teams and Slack to replicate and enhance the capabilities of those chatting platforms with all the AI and isolation techniques and things like that, which makes it a little bit harder, right? Because you're kind of at the mercy. So being able to, I know some of these platforms, they can dynamically create isolation environments or isolation rooms, right? That effectively bring people in and out of those rooms based on the event and provide information, where now they may have to actually build dynamic channels inside of another platform like Slack in order to do that. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. But I think I think that's another component, right? It's just like we talked about it the other day or last week about PagerDuty, what PagerDuty is doing in the AI world. So all these are, to me, are just smaller functional areas inside the operations domain that are going to have AI apply to it.
Yep, exactly.
So good. Well, that was fun. So we'll move on to another topic next week. And so I want to thank everybody for tuning in this week. First of all, I want to thank our sponsor, Windward Consulting Group. You can check them out at windward.com. Windward is a global leader in AI ops, so you can check out some of the stuff that they're doing and go to their website and see some of the thought leadership there. If you like what you're seeing and you like what we're doing here, and I would encourage you to subscribe, either hit the subscribe button on YouTube, or if you're in a learning lab, a dialogue box will most likely pop up asking you to subscribe. So go ahead and subscribe, and you'll be alerted every Friday when we come out with our new broadcast. So, Bill, on that note, I will let you go, and we will catch up next week. I hope you have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Enjoy the weekend.
All right, take care. Bye.
Thank you for joining us in this conversation about AIOps and the future of IT operations. Interested in a deeper dive on these topics? Check out our resources available at AIOpsevolution.com. And remember to subscribe to get the latest episode.